Gretchen? Person. Self. Society. Kristen? Supernatural. Elise? Nature or environment. Very good. The 5 standard literary conflicts. Now, before any of you sits there and says, oh, are you kidding? We're going over this again? Yeah, this is one of the simplest levels of interpretation of literature. So no, I don't intend to teach it again. I'm simply reminding you of where you have addressed conflict before. And it's important that we understand these are called the standard literary conflicts. That means they are conflicts unique to literature, to narrative. We could call them narrative conflicts as well, I suppose, if we wanted to. The conflicts that drive stories. They're very literal. So literally, a person versus person conflict exists in your plays. Somebody give me an example of a person versus person conflict developed in Act 1 of your play. Nora? You're dealing with Midsummer Night's Dream. Talk to me about the person versus person conflict in such a way that everybody can understand what's going on. Hermia versus Demetrius. Demetrius is the man who wants to marry Hermia. Hermia has no interest. What is the nature of their personal conflict? Good. So when we talk about literary conflicts, we talk about interests being in conflict. Her interest is to marry this man. His interest is to marry her. Therefore, they can't both have that interest. Somebody's got to lose. Standard person versus person conflict. And if that's all the plays were about, Shakespeare would be pretty superficial and uninteresting and probably lost to history. But he's usually doing something a little bit more than that. So what we're going to talk about today is not the standard literary conflicts, but thematic conflicts in Shakespeare. This is where it becomes a bit more interesting. And with thematic conflicts and certain other types of criticism that we'll learn during this unit, ideas become a little bit more applicable to other pieces of literature, to your own lives, to philosophy, and so on. So here we are with thematic conflicts. A conflict in theme or ideas is just that, a conflict between an idea and its opposite. So two different ideas conflicting. The important relationship to understand is that the literary conflict usually brings into play the thematic conflict. Nora's given us a conflict here. Demetrius and Aegeus, these two men of Athens, have made a decision. Hermia will marry Demetrius. That is the decision that they have laid out for her. She decides she wants to marry somebody else. And so she is resisting. And Act 1, Scene 1 focuses on the Duke addressing this conflict. Who should win? What sort of ideas are brought out in that conflict? Oh, whoa. Where are all my notes from before? Sorry. I forgot to erase those notes. Give me one moment here. And then, Michael, you can give me the answer. Yep, I'm talking about Nora's conflict specifically. What sort of abstract themes or ideas seem to come out? Hold on. Almost there. Good. Sorry about that. I could have sworn I did it and saved it, but perhaps I was wrong. Michael.
I was going to say
tradition. Tradition versus what would be the opposite of tradition? Because here's the issue. I like where you're going, Michael, but what we need is we need an antonym. If we need an idea and its opposite, tradition would be opposed by what? Rebellion. I think it's a little bit too harsh. Change or innovation. So interestingly, though, let's add a layer to it. What is traditional about this arrangement? What is traditional about this conflict? That the man chooses. Anybody have a fancy word for male power, male domination. Let's throw some college level words up here on the board. Yeah. Patriarchy. Therefore, patriarchy versus matriarchy. Very nice. Midsummer Night's Dream people, you are anticipating another conflict, another personal conflict in your play that also develops this thematic conflict. Do you know which one I'm talking about? You've read a summary of the entire play. Which other personal conflict will bring to mind patriarchy versus matriarchy?
Oberon and Titania.
Oberon versus Titania, king versus queen, both angling for control of a child. The king and queen are deciding who will actually get their way. So a king and queen conflict, we've got a daughter and father conflict. It's obvious that Shakespeare wants to develop some idea of feminine dominance versus masculine dominance, of patriarchy versus matriarchy. And when you think that we have this conflict repeated over and over, this standard literary conflict, this person versus person conflict, but it always has this character, then it's obvious that Shakespeare wants us to think about these ideas. The people themselves are somewhat irrelevant. We want to think about these concepts and ideas, and this is what really enlivens critics about Shakespeare, is they believe that his plays carry some of these thematic conflicts better than any of his contemporaries and better than a lot of other people since, because there's no easy solution for his conflicts here. Connor, you had a question or comment?
Isn't that also shown in the fact that it's always the men in the Midsummer Night's Dream that seem to screw up? They're the ones that get the potion whatnot in their eyes, and they're always
True. However, here's the problem. The women don't do much better. So you're correct that the men make mistakes in Midsummer Night's Dream, but the women don't do all that much better. They're often relatively powerless. It's not Hermia's cleverness or her will that eventually gets her what she wants. It's coincidence, accident, and just happenstance that gets her what she wants. Okay? So good point. But something to think about throughout the rest of the play. Give me some other thematic conflicts, and don't just think about Shakespeare. I know I put you right into Shakespeare. Let's leave Shakespeare for a moment. What other sort of thematic conflicts might we read about in literature? And think about what you've already read this year. What grand thematic conflicts might authors deal with in Secret Life of Bees? Well, in that case, we would be talking about racism versus what? Oh, what do we want to say? Tolerance, equality, acceptance. So racial discrimination versus no racial discrimination, a sense of equality. What other conflict ideas could you think of? Motherhood versus fatherhood, right? August versus T-Ray. How about a separate piece? Childhood versus adulthood. And make sure also, notice that Richa had the right idea, but a slight phrasing error. These are thematic conflicts. They must be abstract ideas. Child is a thing. Childhood is an abstract idea. Okay? Realism and idealism is awesome. And now we could keep, yeah, Kristen, you have another one. Are you sure? Okay. Because we could probably fill many such slides with these conflicts, because these conflicts form the basis of philosophy, of religion, of other sorts of concerns regarding human nature. So when we think about the standard literary conflicts, that's all well and good, but it becomes much more interesting when we see them as mere representations of grander thematic conflicts. And that's where Shakespeare becomes interesting. Now let's talk about some typical Shakespearean thematic conflicts. We'll talk about the gender ones. In fact, I've got a day scheduled in which we will talk about gender concerns within Shakespeare. But here are some fairly typical conflicts, differences in Shakespeare. I might add some, but I just brainstormed 3 off the top of my head that do apply to what you've got going on here. Community. What would the antonym be? Okay, yeah, go along that idea of isolation. Individual, there you go. And Shakespeare will discuss or develop plots and conflicts around people being involved in or removed from a community, or people seeing obligations to themselves and obligations to community. Merchant of Venice people, where's the MOV group? How could you see Portia involved in a conflict where she must choose between her community duty or her individual interest? What's she wrestling with in the act of your play that you've just read? What's she complaining about? Her father decides that she must choose a suitor through this crazy little cask contest where they have to choose the correct little casket, and if they choose it, they get her. So it's total random nonsense. Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. But she must obey that in order to adhere to the community side of this. However, predict, what's her individual desire? What does she want? Who does she want? Bassanio. She wants Bassanio. So do I answer my individual desires, or do I answer what the community wants from me? Law. Law and anarchy, you might think that would be a natural contrast, wouldn't it? Because the opposite of law is lawlessness, and that state would be anarchy. However, Shakespeare's going to go in a different fashion here. And once again, Merchant of Venice will get it, but Measure for Measure people will hit this very strongly as well. Where's the Measure for Measure group? Okay, so in Measure for Measure, Angelo has just taken over the kingdom, and he is throwing down the law in its entirety, the full weight of it, letter by letter. What does he have no capacity for? Bingo. There's a Shakespearean thematic conflict, and Merchant of Venice people will see that one of the primary speeches talks about the value of mercy. And Shylock, the villain of that play, focuses himself entirely over here and will not allow for mercy. It's the opposite of thought. No, that's the opposite of intelligent. I'm thinking the opposite of thought. Action. Michael's rocking and rolling today. The opposite of thought would be action. And you won't read it here, but this is Hamlet's dilemma. Do I think about doing something, or do I actually do it? Another favorite of Shakespeare's. Appearance versus reality. What appears to be true versus what actually is true. Sure. And I'm trying to think of good appearance versus reality examples that don't come from the plays I've already discussed. Yes? Twelfth Night. Every single one of your plays will engage in some amount of disguise, either as a small plot device or as an integral plot device. In Twelfth Night, it's an integral plot device. But certainly, every time disguise is brought up, the idea of appearance versus reality is brought up. And so that's where a plot device does it. We can also see, as I said, the literary conflicts bringing that up as well. People making judgments based upon appearance, or are people making judgments based upon the reality of a situation? This is an important principle in understanding this. This is what I was taught when I was a college student about Shakespeare, how to understand him, how to get inside his brain, his Renaissance post-medieval brain. To understand Shakespeare as a thinker, to understand where he's coming from. He does not think law is bad, even though he criticizes it in Measure for Measure and Merchant of Venice. He does not necessarily think patriarchy or the rule of men is wholly bad, even though he will definitely criticize it in a number of places. Merchant of Venice, Twelfth Night, Midsummer Night's Dream. The point is imbalance. When one of these is extreme and the other is found in deficiency, then we have a problem. When a father's rule says, follow my way, daughter, or I will kill you, we've got a problem. When there is no balance or understanding of her wishes, we have imbalance. When Angelo says, I will enforce the law regardless of circumstance, and you, young couple of lovers, even though you were engaged and about to be married next Tuesday, she's pregnant, you're dead. The extremism of that is Shakespeare's problem. And in Act 1, you often see some amount of extremity. And it's the imbalance that's the problem. Okay, here's a good question. We'll see if anybody can grab this one. Can you see how this is Shakespeare's inheritance of medieval medicine? Anybody know a little bit about medieval medicine and how they determined what disease or what caused disease and how it might relate to the idea of imbalance?
Isn't it based on like humors?
Very good. Do you know the 4 humors?
Is it like the elements or is it like emotion?
It's not the elements. Elements would be some other sort of philosophy or principle. Yeah, something else. But
is it like humors as in like if you have too much like sadness or happiness?
no, humors are fluids.
Yeah, it's like bile, blood.
There's black bile. There's blood. The rest of you are looking at us like we're crazy. We are crazy, but that has nothing to do with this discussion. Medieval medicine saw that disease came from an imbalance of fluids in the body. Now, do they have any scientific evidence for this? Of course not. This is pre-science. This is medieval Europe. They were all idiots, illiterate, and disease-ridden. So we have the 4 humors: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. It's always wonderful to talk about phlegm. Thank you, Omar. If one of these was out of balance, then all you had to do was drain the excessive fluid. And they had a number of different ways of doing this. Do you know any of the ways? So the one that you probably know about is blood. Yeah, leeching. That's why they would leech people. Because they would determine, oh, you have an excess of blood. So you'll have some leech treatment. Now you're all laughing, and of course we laugh because we are so much better than they were. We laugh, but the principle is interesting. And the principle, when applied to science, probably sounds a little bit ridiculous. But when applied to ethics, is not so ridiculous. Because, yeah, Michael.
So how does this apply to appearance versus reality?
Because judging something on appearance probably has some precedence in terms of safety and proper judgment, right? Somebody might tell you, hey, never judge a book by its cover. Thinking, no, hold on. Covers tell you a lot. They don't tell you the entire story. To say that I will never, ever judge something based upon its appearance in any way, shape, or form is extreme and ridiculous. No, we use appearances to make judgments, but we should always temper that with further understanding of the way the thing really is. There should be a mix of both. You shouldn't go to one extreme or the other in any way, shape, or form. Okay? And we've been so taught not to judge based on appearance that we forget that there's sometimes some value in that, judging on somebody's appearance. Okay? The imbalance idea not only comes from medieval medicine, it also comes from our old buddy Aristotle. Aristotle, father of medieval thought, and definitely influential in Shakespeare's mind, showed that ethics comes from what he called the golden mean. And he's using the word mean in mathematical terms, like the meeting point between two extremes, the average, and so on. The golden mean is the average between two extremities. So, let me give you an easy to understand example. Courage is a virtue. Aristotle identifies it as such. He says, courage is a virtue because it lies between two extremes. Do you know what those extremes might be? What's an extreme deficiency of courage? Cowardice. What's an extreme excess of courage? Not necessarily ruthlessness, but close. Pride would be something else. Foolishness or foolhardiness, yeah. We would call it, that one's, don't worry, Omar, that one's a little bit uncommon. A deficiency of courage, hold on, let me review. In Aristotle's mind, and he has the writings on this just as you read those on tragedy. In Aristotle's mind, a deficiency of courage is cowardice. That's a bad thing. Why? Because cowardice is bad. No. Get in Aristotle's mind. It's a bad thing because it's a deficiency. Things are imbalanced. An excess of courage, too much, is foolhardiness. That's when people run out on the battlefield saying, I can kill you all! Bad things happen. Courage is a tempering of these two. Courage is a balance. Courage is a meeting place between these two. And pride would probably be an excess of some sort of healthy self-image. And a deficiency in this, I'm struggling for a word, but something in which you have absolutely no confidence within yourself would be a deficiency, and pride and vanity would be an excess, and in the middle is some healthy self-image and understanding of yourself. This is all of Aristotle's ethics, his morality. And Shakespeare, as an inheritor of both that and an inheritor of medieval prejudices, decides that the proper way to live your life is in balance. And when you look at his thematic conflicts, something happens in Act 1 to throw them out of balance. Something happens in Act 1 such that people are not paying attention to both sides, and they are on one side as opposed to another. Something is extreme.
Like, for example, the Tempest, would it be like revenge and forgiveness?
In the Tempest, yes. Very good. That's an excellent example. And who do you see teetering on the brink who might be a problem with the revenge idea? Prospero. Somebody who has now received a healthy amount of power and the ability to carry out revenge. And revenge might be conflicted there with forgiveness, like you say. That's an excellent one. So, should we totally forgive and forget everything? Prospero has been ejected from his home. He has been his throne has been stolen from him. He and his daughter were kicked out to live on an island by themselves with no other human beings around. For what, 12 years? I think it's 12 years. Should he totally forgive and forget? Absolutely not. But should he be bloodthirsty and bent on revenge? No. He shouldn't suddenly master magical powers and go on a killing rampage in some sort of action film where everybody dies. That would be extreme as well. However, Prospero is angry enough at the beginning that we could see he might be going that way. And he's hatching plans. And those of you not reading, the Tempest of the title is the tempest that he uses to wreck a ship with his enemies on it. It's the first plot event. So we could have a problem with imbalance there. All of you are dealing with this in different sorts of ways, but what you must understand, especially for the writing tomorrow, is that the standard literary conflicts, the person versus person, the person versus self, the person versus society, and quite often a number of them, will be used to develop thematic conflicts. And in your writing, you must connect the two. So you would say this personal conflict brings to mind this thematic conflict, and this other personal conflict over here further adds to it, as we saw in Midsummer Night's Dream. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow is not an in-class essay. It's not a test, anything like that. In fact, tomorrow we'll start with you and your playgroups talking about ideas and sharing those ideas. And when you feel like peeling off and doing your writing on your own, you're welcome to start doing that. It's due by the end of the period. If you wish to prepare that outside of class, read about it online, take a look at the assignment sheet, feel free. It's open book, open note, and you must use quotation support. So please make sure that you do have your books with you. Be prepared for it so you can use that 42 minutes as efficiently as possible. Read the assignment sheet, come into class, and be ready to go. Questions about that? Cool. Then that's it.